Do I want my kids and grandkids to be paying for roads in Seattle? They're going to find less and less usage. And by the time that I'm gone, they're still writing checks to cover that useless project.
It's really tragic. Several people have said that in this conference, and I'll say it again. We knew all of this 30 years ago. I have no children, none I know about, because in 1969 I read M. King Hubbard, who was the originator of the concept of peak oil. And I said, oh my God, stuff is going to get really tough when we reach that peak oil, which is going to be roughly when I retire.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
I'm at the ASPO conference and I'm here with Charlie Hall, who is an ecologist. What's an ecologist?
Ecologist is really like a mathematician or a physicist. It has no sense of political sense in its academic sense. It's simply somebody who studies the environment, environmental relations in general. I don't care if people use the word ecologist for somebody who has a environmental agenda, but I would call such a person an environmentalist. Okay. An ecologist is somebody who studies relations in the environment. And I study energy in the environment, at least that's how I started.
So how do we know, since you study environment and energy, how do we know that peak oil is not just somebody's dream, fabrication? How do we know?
Because the data says this, it's a reality. Peak oil happened in the United States in 1970. It was predicted in 1955, and we've been producing less oil in the United States essentially every year since 1970.
Okay.
So it's for the United States, it's a fact, but it's also a fact for some 60 of the world's 80 oil-producing countries.
That we are it's already peaked?
It's already peaked for
60 of the 80?
60 of the 80 countries. So, okay. and we see it in other things. We've even had peak gas, but that's a little bit more ambivalent. One of our people here, Richard Heinberg, even wrote a book called Peak Everything. So, but peak oil is a reality. It's not some woolly-headed professor's concept.
So tell us about your great example.
Well, first of all, just to make a general sort of statement, I'm interested as an ecologist in how energy is used in nature. And to make a very simple example, if you're a cheetah, and as young cheetah do, they can't catch the animals very well, so that without their mother they'd starve. So as a cheetah, you have to be able to invest a lot of energy into running fast after an antelope and catching the antelope, and then you must get more energy from the antelope, obviously, to feed yourself and your cubs, or there would be no possibility of cheetahs still being here. But in fact, cheetahs are doing not fine, but there are plenty of cheetahs in the right parts of Africa. So any organism in nature, any tree, always has to make a greater energy profit than the cost of living. The cost of living is very high. It's called respiration. There are other aspects of it.
And digestion and
all those
things that we do, right.
All of those things that we do. Now, we're used to having tons of food available, more than we can eat. We get too fat and all this stuff. But for most organisms in nature, getting enough energy is a tough job. So I started in this as an ecologist. In my PhD work, I worked under the great energy ecologist Howard Odum. And I was, as a kid, I was totally fascinated with fish, anything to do with fish, water, you know, that kind of kid. And what I did for my PhD was I measured the amount of energy that a fish would use, or a group of fish would use, getting from point A to point B. How much did it cost to do this migration, and how much the fish would gain from going from areas that would have higher productivity at different points of their life cycle. So from that, I derived the concept of energy return on energy invested. And then in 1981, myself and a very good student named Cutler Cleveland applied this to looking at oil. How much energy does it take to get the next barrel of oil, and how is this changed over time? And to make a long story short, we found in the 1930s we would invest 1 barrel of oil, or 1 calorie if you wish, and get back 100.
Okay.
In the 1970s, when we started looking at it, we would invest 1 and get back 30. Now we invest 1 and get back somewhere around 10 or 12, and that's mostly just pumping out the old reservoirs.
And what you're saying, it's costing us more energy because it's tougher
get the next unit.
more
Yep.
technology, harder to find.
We've depleted the good stuff. It's the best first principle. Humans, our grandparents were not stupid. They went after the best stuff.
Well, so
and
the
depleted,
cheetah too.
Sure. And they depleted the best stuff.
Yeah.
The cheetah is going to go after the big, fat, sick antelope or whatever first.
Yeah.
But when they're gone, and then they have to go after tough zebras, then their energy return on investment gets a little tougher, and maybe on a bad year they don't make it, and that's it for the cheetahs in that area.
Okay.
So it's nature's iron law that each organism must gain more energy than it uses. And we are being increasingly subject to that. So not only is the energy return on investment declining for oil, gas, coal, all of these things, the energy return on investment for the alternatives is, in most cases, maybe all cases, much lower. Classic example. We had a big government program to encourage corn-based ethanol.
Yes.
And we don't hear much about that anymore. We're doing it, but nobody's very enthusiastic about it. It was a financial disaster, and it was heavily subsidized by the government. The farmers liked it, of course. But there have been many of these refineries have been closed because the finances don't work. Well, you could predict that on the energy, because the energy, it takes fossil energy, gas to make fertilizer, oil to run tractors, et cetera, et cetera. It takes about 1 calorie of fossil energy, oil and gas, to make 1 calorie of the alcohol from the corn by the time you do the whole thing. Now, there's some people say, oh, no, you get back 1.6 for 1, and there are others that say, oh, no, you only get back 0.8 for 1. But a fuel has to have a high energy return on investment for it to be useful to society, because you have to do all kinds of other things to support the use of the fuel. For example, you have to build the trucks and roads and maintain them and the bridges and so forth in order to use that fuel.
So that if we calculate things like solar or wind or geothermal, we have to be thinking about not only their return, but the infrastructure to build them, the power lines.
Everything connected with it. And we unfortunately keep all of our data in the United States in terms of monetary units. I mean, we're money-based.
Sure.
But economy is really about energy. And just to give you an example, my coffee cup over there, if I have my coffee cup, every time you spend $1 in society, about a coffee cup's worth of oil or its equivalent as other kinds of energy is used somewhere in the economy. You buy a bagel, so they use energy to grow the wheat, and then energy to grind it up, energy to ship it here from Nebraska, wherever, energy to mix it, energy to bake it and so forth. So that the economy is really, to my mind and to those of many other people, is really about energy.
Yeah.
Only secondarily about the money with which we keep track of these things.
Because the money systems can come and go.
Yeah.
Energy, you're telling me, is needed for life.
You got to have it.
Right.
You got to have it in nature, and we're part of nature too, and we don't have enough sense of that. And I say this often in my talks: Mother Nature holds the high cards. Mother Nature bats last.
Thanks, Charlie.
Did I do a good job?
You did a
This is from the Seattle Times in 2007. I find the whole statement of energy independence to be absolutely ludicrous. And anybody who really believes that strongly, given the current mode of operation, the way we run the world that we're living in today, doesn't get the problem. It concerns me a lot as to who's going to fill in that last spot. The question is, where are we going? If this statement of energy independence is what's going to drive our policy, we have a real problem. At the center of my, and I'm going to just kind of go through some general things now, and then we can kind of question, answer, we'll get more specifics. But I vet every investment that I look at through this lens first. If it can't pass the peak oil test, in other words, the sensitivity to energy prices, the availability of energy, whether it's liquid fuels or electricity, it doesn't even make the first cut. And I have found that to be very, very effective. As a consequence of that, I avoid an awful lot of bad pitfalls that a lot of people have experienced in the last couple of years. And now, the areas to watch, the picture of the Volt, and by the way, that is the one that they're going to use. That's the real thing. Of course, I got a picture from the back end. Anyway, but that's going to be a commodity, and it's going to be very sensitive to the lithium input, the labor costs, and all the other. I see the greatest opportunities in those 2 extension cords and all the things that are hooked to them. That's because without those, alternative energies do you no good at all. You get all the wind turbines in the world, but if you can't get the power to where it's needed, it's useless. And it's a more conservative way to be invested. That's my take on that. On the rail side, everybody's all excited about the trains, and Warren Buffett owns them, and as soon as it comes out that he owns a position, of course, they move, and then a lot of you probably know that Bill Gates' largest position in his personal account is Canadian National. But below that, there's all kinds of other stuff, because if there's no rail, those trains don't run. So who's producing the rail? Who's doing the friction management of the wheels? That's a very interesting area. What about the brakes, the bearings, the lubricants, the whole mix of the infrastructure that supports that train? So maybe the high-profile, high-priced product might be on the trains, but dig deeper than that. Take the knowledge of peak oil and put it to work for you. Go deeper. And then finally, what other great ideas? And I'll tell you, every person in this room knows something that could fill in that question mark on the right. There's an area that you know that the majority of us either aren't aware of or don't know about because it hasn't come to us yet. That's your edge. That's your advantage. And then there's this. Now, those of you who are in Houston know that I made the comment that Boeing would never deliver half of the 787s that have been ordered. Subsequent to that, I've been told a number of times that my number is too low. I don't want to pick on Boeing, so I'll add the A380 to it. If you get the Financial Times, or if you go to the Financial Times website at ft.com/A380, you can see a video of the Emirates A380 that's currently flying with the cabin in it with a shower and the business seats. Those things are doomed. That A380 has to lift a tremendous amount of fuel just to lift the fuel that it's going to use. So the airline industries are going to change. I like to tell folks that we're going to go back to the 1940s and 1950s, and Clark Gable will fly and I will ride the train. And then below, you have below that is actually, if any of you from Washington, California know that in Oregon, you can run these triple trailer rigs, that's an experience passing one of those, by the way, on the freeway, because it takes an hour. That is a stopgap measure. It's a dead end. The trucking industry is too energy intensive for long-haul trucking. But the impacts on communities that depend on that long-haul trucking because they've killed off the rail or they've killed off the other forms of rail would be the only one, but the only way to get their materials. Some of these communities are in distress. Lower right-hand corner, because the whole automobile industry there are opportunities in there, but for life, man, I can't figure where they are. Jeff Rubens, who I understand are going to have a remote with him, a pre-done position. Jeff gets it, and he, in one of his pieces earlier this year, commented that he thinks that the U.S. car fleet will start shrinking at 10 million units per year. Well, if we shrink at 10 million units per year, one, you don't want to own a manufacturer of cars unless it happens to be the only one people want to buy. But it also says that the revenues based on the use of those cars, gas taxes, tolls, are going to contract. And then finally, in the upper right-hand corner, and this is, I think, the one that right now most people don't, and I'm not sure I got my head completely around this one myself, is that globalization is going to unwind. It is toast. Again, to go back to Jeff Rubin, he did an analysis of steel. He thinks that in the area of steel, transportation costs become a tariff on foreign imports. And in fact, right now, it's cheaper to bring steel in from Pittsburgh than it is from China because you only have 1 man-hour of labor in a ton of steel. And it's very easy to overwhelm that 1 hour advantage. 1 hour of man labor is just not enough. So I think we're at the bottom of that incident. We're going to see it in things like steel and raw materials that have high transportation costs and low value added. But over time, and transportation costs rise, that's going to move its way up the food chain. And eventually it will get to Nike shoes and t-shirts and some of these other things. This also was in the Seattle Times. I don't think it was done by one of theirs, but again, being from Seattle, the belief that technology is going to save our bacon, and I think it's very unlikely that, in fact, technology will pull our chestnuts out on this one. And so, don't overweight that in your approach to working on the peak oil investment scenario. It is important, but we have a very, very high level of faith in technology in this country. And it's going to come down to how far you can walk, maybe. I'm not that cynical. We're not going back to the 1400s, to quote Roger Besnet. My favorite quote, this is on all my emails, and I think most of my family is sick and tired of seeing it. It's difficult to get a man to understand something if his lifestyle, religion, job, whatever, depends on him not understanding it. Make sure you also apply that to your own thinking. Don't go over the top on peak oil to the point that you were unable to understand alternatives either. And then finally, Chief Seattle, whom Seattle is named after, made this statement. We did not inherit the earth from our parents, we are borrowing it from our children. My father told me very early in my life that if I borrowed a saw from somebody, I was to return it sharpened, better shaped than I borrowed it. Well, I would like to believe that what we're going to borrow and give back to our kids will be better than what we currently have in our hands. On that note, thank you very much, and I hope you've learned something valuable.
How do we better harness the intellect, energy, and commitment at this conference? And what would you give us one suggestion that you would tell you're an elected official when you get home about the peak oil problem and what to do about it? So how do we harness the intellect, energy, and commitment that's here at this conference? And then what would you tell an elected official in your community about peak oil and what to do about it?
Well, I mean, I certainly don't need to go back and tell them. I've been telling them for 2 years, and what I've been telling them, that it's a threat to the public safety and the welfare of the people. I mean, in the shortest possible terms, that's what my obligation is. Harnessing the energy here would be, you know, I don't know how many different places you all came from, but if there's 500 of you, then there's 500 places you're going to go back to. If you want to harness that energy, then you need to form, and probably many of you already do, but it needs to grow, is you need to create a lot of little dots that coalesce into bigger dots that can then take the citizens' grassroots lobbying effort to the legislature. When you walk in and you talk to your local representative and say, I want to talk to you about peak oil, they go up and they sit down with their colleagues in the caucus. Anyone know anything about peak oil? No? Okay. So you're going to need a greater mass of lobbying efforts to do this. You know, in Congress you can go in, I guess you get to the right guy and you can get money for a bridge. But on this type of stuff in the legislature, when you're asking them to change the world as they know it, that the things their kids that are learning in college may no longer matter, that they've just spent 60 grand on, then I think you're asking a big thing. So you're going to need to create a critical mass of people who are going in and saying, we have a threat to the public safety and welfare. We have an issue that's going to affect our economy. And you need to grow those dots. I mean, I said this, and I know you wanted this short, so I'm going to say, I said it in the thing, stop your choir practice. Talking to each other is choir practice. And so those of you who are not talking to decision makers in a calculated, strategic fashion, you're involved in choir practice. That's it.
Again, I think it's important to phrase things properly and to use the right vocabulary so that you're not creating the opportunity for someone to block the message. So I think sticking with the idea of energy security, but I think really what I would do is I would target people involved in politics, politicians and their advisors, with the message that I'm concerned about energy security, and I'm concerned about whether or not we have the proper data to plan ahead. And everyone has to do some planning if you're a politician, whether it's where to spend your money or where to raise your money. So you need to suggest that we have enough political pressure at all levels to convince the federal government to look at the USGS data and to say whether or not this is a valid data set that we can base our projections and our lives going forward in an era of increased geopolitical threats to our energy security. Everybody likes to feel secure, and if you stick with that message, point them in the right direction to increase the security by determining a real data set as to what we have access to, what we expect to use on a going forward basis, whether it's a, same story or whether there's a best case or a worst case projections, but we need to change the data set.
Okay, now you remember your date's father is expecting his daughter back real soon, so we got to shorten it up just a little bit.
Well, I should probably do the same thing as I did at the ASPO conference in Paris. I said, people in general are interested in drinking. So I would say that, okay, I have 10 bottles of champagne here, and one of these bottles contains 100 billion barrels of oil. And this is all we have in the refrigerator just now. And pull up the glasses. I mean, 1 year is 1/3 of the bottle, so that 3 glasses is 1 bottle. And people understand, well, okay, if I had 10 bottles to drink and finish 1 bottle in 3 years, it's very easy to understand that we have a problem very soon. And I think that's an effective way to get people to understand it. Talk about drinking and not the using it.
First of all, if you haven't talked to your family, most of you talk to your families, talk to your family. I've talked to my immediate family, of course, and I talked to my extended family. A couple of Christmases ago, I gathered them all together and I said, we have a serious problem, and I want them to understand that I'm not crazy. So I explained the situation. You can't sit next to me on an airplane and not hear the message. And I'm very careful in the words that I use. And I'll say, some people believe, okay, and here's why they believe that. And I'll get the message out in that way. I don't give them a doomer message. I will tell them, some people think that this may be the consequences, and here's why they think that. And it gets their attention. And I've had very few times that I wasn't successful in the person who sat next to me on the plane. They got off the plane. I was confident they understood the problem. They were going to go, they were going to read, they were going to talk to people about it. So just commit to, as you travel home, as you travel around, it's very easy to bring up the subject, you can talk about gas prices. What do you think about these gas prices? Why are they high? They're high because oil production's flat and it's going to deplete at some point, and get the conversation going that way.
I completely concur on that. My wife gets sick and tired of going to a party with me anymore. Because after a while I have a group of people, you do that. You bring up, hey, what do you think of these gas? And all of a sudden, and then be careful, because this is not an easy topic and it takes time. I found a little success by actually hitching my wagon to the climate change model. I became a strong defender of the program of climate change at the University of Washington, got my foot in the door, was able to make presentations there. So I've actually used climate change as bait, and hopefully they're not all going to get the message on, and to people who I could have normally not gotten to. And maybe that's a tool that you can use. It works for me, and it's worked well, and even with the political level. That gets me in the door, and then I can give them a slow dose and move from there.
So I'm sort of old school. I still believe in publications and the power of the pen. Easy for me to say as a professor, papers are my currency. Well, I'll give a sort of example to explain this. So I guess I fully believe in this idea of doing publications or proceedings of ASPO, and so I support what Alex Dessler is trying to do with getting some journal. A presentation lasts as long as the room, right, the people in the room hear it. A publication can reach a broader audience. One example is I've spent the last 2 years, including in the speeches, lectures, seminars, and talks I give, the value of manure in the U.S. as a potential source of renewable energy. We've got enough manure in the U.S. to offset 1% of our energy needs, about 2.5% of our electricity needs, and it's actually a pretty good resource in many ways. And no one ever cared. I wrote a paper that was just published about 2 months ago saying the same thing, and it was peer-reviewed scientific journal paper, and it got picked up and became an international media sensation, where I was interviewed on BBC, NPR, ABC, CBS, it was on ABC Nightly News across the nation, and it was downloaded 2,000 times in 3 weeks, a scientific paper. So I think the power of publication is actually a pretty good way for you to reach a broader audience, much more so than presentations or speaking. So I think this idea of proceeding to publications could be quite effective for you.
And Michael, we've always known you were full of manure.
I'm full of BS. Yeah, exactly. I set myself up.
I think my message is urgency. This is a lot closer than most people think. I think the whole world realizes there's some sort of problem out there with energy. I think our message here is what we really specialize in is understand the details, and that we understand things like world oil production has not significantly increased or flat for the last 3 or 4 years. We understand peak exports. We watch Mexico, this sort of thing. And I think we realize that very, very soon, it's months, won't tell you how many months, there's going to be real serious problems. And that's my message.
And I'm going to give it my final shot here to kind of wrap things up. Over the last 8 years, I've attended 8 leadership symposiums. You'd think I would have learned after one, but took 8. And the most valuable information I ever got from a leadership program was that relationships are primary and everything else is derivative. Basically that means that it's that relationship you have that changes people's minds. A stranger isn't gonna give you the time of day, but going to meet an elected official with somebody that he or she knows, and all of a sudden everything changes, and all of a sudden they have an open mind. And it's a good lesson for all of us not to burn bridges, because they may not agree with you on this issue, but maybe another one will come along and they'll be your friend. It's the most important lesson I've ever learned.
Did I do a good job?
You did a good, don't go away.